what's the biggest blind spot you end up solving for your clients?
Feeding them the information that they didn't know they needed to actually import their boat.
Does the location of your yacht specific customs broker actually matter?
It does in some cases, but not always.
So US Customs means the whole US.
Correct.
Trey, you're now the third generation of customs broker at Howard Reeder Inc. How many yachts do you think were imported by your firm since 1947?
Oh, gosh. Well, 1947, I don't know, but in the last 20 years, I would say somewhere between 5 and 10,000 easily.
And what is the biggest import bill you have ever seen one of your clients pay?
$80 million yacht was about $1.2 million in import duties.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Full Displacement. This is the podcast by Current Yachts. I'm here today with Amanda Haley and Trey Reeder. Trey is from Howard Reeder, and his company is a customs broker. And that means that he assists, along with his colleagues, yacht buyers, yacht sellers who have concerns around customs, importation, duties, and we'll see probably a few more topics of the like. Trey, why don't you start by telling us how you got about being a customs broker and how long you've been in the marine business?
So the customs brokerage side of it, oddly enough, I would be the third generation in Howard S. Reeder Inc. My grandfather started the company back in I guess it was 1947.
Wow.
He was one of the very early customs brokers when the test was actually given orally to get the license to be a broker, is at least the way my father told it to me. And then my father's been in the business for probably 50 plus years at this point. And I started in 2001 is when I joined the company. So been there for a couple of decades. And,
Yeah, you put your time in too.
yeah. I've been around for a while now. But yeah, my father got into the yacht part of it. He'd been just a customs broker doing just normal cargo and shipments for years. And then someone called and one day, I think it was Malcolm Forbes' boat called the Highlander. And being South Floridians and boaters and all that, I said, boat, that sounds cool. Let me try that. And he dealt with dealing with an import with that and fell in love with it and said, I can do boats. Let's do boats, And as the industry's grown, the business has grown and there's just more boats and it's gotten more complicated and turned into quite a thriving business, this professional yachting these days. So
Yeah, it's a niche market for certain.
very
Are
much.
you a boater yourself, Trey?
Yeah, I used to consider myself a boater. Then I had children and my son started baseball and that kind of took away most of our weekends. But yes, we were very much grew up on boats. Would spend, weeks in the summer and cruising the Bahamas with the family. I spent years basically as a mate on some charter boats and some private boats doing some mating work and fishing tournaments, things like that. And having my own, smaller center consoles and things. So we've grown up, boating. My first job was at a bait and tackle store, which was from, about 4 years till I graduated high school and then went off to college. But yeah, so we've been around boats and fishing and did some sailing when I was younger. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a bit of a glutton for punishment. We like to buy old boats and spend a lot of time being itchy doing fiberglass and yeah.
And not just time, a lot of money too.
Yes. No, but we've learned we got to stop doing that stuff a little bit just because time is not on our side anymore. So they tend to sit. And my father's been a really avid antique boat restorer. So he'll buy these old 1950s Chris Crafts and bring them to his garage and sand them and varnish them and sand them and varnish them and rebuild old engines and do all that. So
We're going to have to invite your dad to the podcast for a different topic altogether, I feel.
Absolutely. That sounds awesome.
So for those of our listeners who may have called the prior episode we did on customs brokerage in general, we had a conversation with Michelle Tirarotra from
Mhm.
Compass Logistics Marine, and that was a few months back. So already things have changed. And my first question naturally is, we've seen so many dramatic changes in the yacht imports lately. Could you give us a rundown of what's happened in the last 6 months, more or less?
Sure. I know when Michelle was on, she had kind of mentioned waiting to find out what the Supreme Court says. Well, now we know the answer to that was the Supreme Court shut down the IEPA tariffs, but then the president immediately put in the Section 122 tariffs, which is a worldwide tariff of 10%. So that basically just went right into effect, which in some cases has actually increased the imports a little bit because the number did go down. I'd say there's so many boats in Europe that are usually getting imported here. When they're 15%, that all but died.
Mhm.
I know originally when the IEPA tariffs went in, it was like a light switch. I mean, we probably, at least for the brokerage boats, for yacht brokers that have customers coming in, our business probably dropped 95 or more percent. And I'd say has barely come back on the used side. It's ticked up a little bit since the 10%, but that was, yeah, not great for the yachting world. It may work for, $10 trinkets that go on the shelves, or now they're $11 or something. But when you're dealing with a guy with a $500,000 boat who doesn't want to pay $50,000 or $60,000, to find a buyer, that really has slowed that down a bit.
Yeah, and I think additionally the volatility has not helped because things are
For
changing
sure.
constantly. It's hard to predict.
Yeah.
You don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. In the case of clients that may have had to pay the higher duty rates and then that duty was reversed or
Sure.
reshuffled, have you assisted some of these clients in getting some of that money back? What does that look
Yep.
like?
Yeah, absolutely. The customs came up. I think the normal systems that they had in place for refunds, whether it was an error or an overcharge or whatever it was, I think customs saw that and said, wait a second, this is going to be way too big of a task to go through our normal
Hmm.
course of action. So they came up with an acronym of CAPE, and God's escaping me what that acronym stands for, but it's CAPE system, and it allows well, very efficiently has made it pretty easy to file for those refunds. So we've certainly done that and assist people through it. They have to create an account on a thing called the ACE portal, where they create the account, but they have to put their bank account in there as well, a U.S. bank account, because the government does not use treasury checks anymore to send refunds from customs, only through ACH, which is something that the
Okay.
president put in place as well. But once they have that account set up, then yeah, we can assist on filing that submission. I mean, we have some big dealer importers that are owed millions of dollars that have actually already started to see quite a few of that, quite a few of their import entries be refunded already within the first 30 days. So it is a system that's working, which is good.
That is really good to hear. So let's get specific about the current rates that we're talking about now. You had said that there has been implemented a 10% across the board, but can you break that down specifically to the countries for
Sure.
some of these certain manufacturers? So, what I understand is it used to be the 1.5%, then it's the 10%, and so now it's what, 11.5% when you add those two
Right.
together?
Correct. Yeah. So it's 11.5% for boats with inboards, 11% for boats with outboards, just because normally they only have a 1% rate. But yes, it's the baseline tariff plus these additional Section 122 tariffs, which are the 10%. But the difference between the IEPA tariffs and those were very country specific, where, one country would be 19%, another would be 30, Europe would be 15. So that was also hard to try to keep up with because,
Hmm.
from one day to the next, a country could be targeted and raised 5% or 10% just on something another president may have said or something like
Right.
that. So I know we had that with Brazil, where they bumped them up to 50% for a while based on an election result. So it was a little, yeah, very hard to keep up with. But with the Section 122 tariffs, it's a worldwide tariff of 10%. The only country that at least right now that I can think of that has an additional tariff is just China, because they're subject to this 25% called Section 301 tariffs that have been in place since 2019. Which have stuck. Those have not been struck down. I don't think anyone's been able to defeat that one. But so that's it for
And
now.
for clarity, what we're talking about here is any boat that was foreign built and never imported to the US. So in plain terms, what does that mean? It's not just new boats that you buy off of a shipyard in Italy or China. If there is a foreign built boat outside of US waters that never paid duty, if you're buying that pre-owned boat, you're going to have to pay the duty. So that is why when we discuss, with our clients, evaluating a listing that we're going to take on or a purchase that a buyer may consider, the first question to ask often, or one of the first is this boat duty paid? And do we have
Sure.
the entry summary? So thank you for clarifying the
Yeah.
different rates for us. But it sounds like it's 10, 11, or China has got the higher rate, but that's pretty much the rule.
Right.
Yes?
Yeah, and they're at 36.5% right now for most of their boats in China. So yeah, they're
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching Full Displacement. If you'd like to see more episodes like this one, make sure to subscribe. Let's get back to the show.
For a short period of time, I heard there was a caveat with South Africa on the AGOA. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So for a little while, they actually, I mean, that's the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is a free trade agreement between many of the countries in Africa and particularly South Africa, because that's where most of the, I guess, catamaran sailboats and the leopards and those type of boats come out of. So they were at 30% with the IEPA tariffs. And also, the free trade agreement had expired, but they did re-up that agreement till the end of this year. So for a short period of time, South Africa was a little nervous. They weren't going to be added back into it, but they were. So they were happy with that. You're still subject, though, to the 10% tariffs, just not the 1.5%. Get you out of, it's not a total free trade, but it does lower it, just a small amount.
Okay, so it does still keep
It does.
everybody across the board to right around that 11 to 11.5% besides China. So that is different from, the past 6
Sure.
months that we were talking about. There were some countries that it was up to 45%
Yeah.
at a certain point. It's
Yeah. And
a
a lot
lot.
of what we've heard from a lot of the builders, they were happy that it came back down to the 10% because it evened the playing field. I know the South African catamarans were, they were struggling because they were having to compete with the French catamarans that were half the import duty. So they were happy that at least the playing field's level. And 30% for them, they said those were just numbers that, destroyed their margins. It was almost not worth building boats. Yeah. So
Yeah, yeah. Though this is
at least for
definitely
the
level things
US.
out. Yeah.
Right.
I had a follow-on question to that. What are some of the mistakes that you've seen come across your desk from buyers when they're looking to import a yacht?
So, yeah, I mean, it leads into more of the internals of the boat, things like the engines and stuff. We see that a lot. Well, not as often, but I have seen, especially in the used boat market, where a broker will say, "Bring your boat to the U.S. We've got a great market," and they'll sail their boat up from the Caribbean somewhere, and they'll get here and have an unimportable boat. So that I know does not a great look for the broker. Doesn't make, certainly doesn't make the buyer or the seller rather very happy when that happens. So you want to make sure before you're doing that you do have an importable product.
Can you explain actually what that means? What makes a boat not
Sure.
importable? Yeah.
Sure. So at least in the case of the EPA, your engines, depending on their size and model year, are required to be U.S. Environmental Protection Agency compliant. And if they are not, the government will not accept the import. So you can't import it. So on the engines themselves, especially the catamaran market, a lot of them are running smaller engines, like smaller Volvos, smaller Yanmars. Those are usually very well labeled. But a lot of those sizes, actually, their compliance started in 1999 and 2000. So, almost 30 years ago. So even those used boats that are getting up there in age still need to have that compliance. But typically there is a label on the engine that will have what they call an EPA engine family name. And if you have that EPA engine family name that's issued to that engine for the model year, then it is a compliant engine. And usually will also state that this engine is compliant for US EPA regulations for its model year. But that label is a requirement of being compliant. So all the
Okay.
manufacturers put that on there.
And so I guess you're saying perhaps that it's gone easier because everybody is just more aware and
Sure.
pays more attention to those details. Okay, good to
Yep.
know.
Yeah, I had this happen on a beautiful FAR 60.
Okay.
And someone was trying to bring the boat to the United States and realized that the engines were not EPA compliant.
Right.
And then couldn't bring the boat over here. And it was such a sad thing because it was a gorgeous, gorgeous boat. And he
Right.
had to repower the
Sure.
vessel and get rid of a beautiful engine.
Right. Yeah. And
At
trying to
that point,
find somewhere to deal with it is a problem too.
Yeah.
It's what do you
yeah,
do with that engine that's in perfect shape? So
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
So that's usually my advice when a broker calls, or when usually a broker will have a buyer call us and we'll just discuss, hey, the ins and outs of an import. And usually that's one of my first things is make sure you're getting, if you want to flag it US, you need to make sure you're getting an importable boat. So check the engines, see if you can get, I guess we can probably move into that. Also the Lacey Act stuff as well, which that's harder on the used boats. But yeah, to find those things, the compliant issues first, because at the end of the day, a boat's a boat. Like the boat, and you think it's built well, you're going to want to buy it. But if it fits within your plans of how you want to flag it and use it, then that's, I'd say, the most important thing, because I have seen that ruin quite a few deals, just the engines alone.
And it's interesting, we've been running across this now recently, even though a boat is U.S. Coast Guard documented and it's been in the U.S. for many, many years,
Sure.
to track down the import document, the form CBP 7501,
Sure.
yeah, it's hard to do. And this could be, 10 years later. Just recently, we put a boat under contract for a 2014 Azimuth, which
Right.
is a four-wheel boat,
Of course.
and it's old. And to find that and to track that down is sometimes a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. We have, I spend at least a half an hour every single day looking for people's, brokers will send, hey, here's a hull ID number. We're looking for this boat. We got it listed. Do you have it? So, and a lot of times we do have those for people. So, and our records go back almost 20 years on just our
Yeah, that's
boats. We're required to keep it for 5 years, but
Right.
we keep them
not
for almost.
everyone keeps them as long as you do. I can tell you this.
And one thing we've always done, and I would want to make sure that their broker does, is put the hull ID number of the boat on the actual import because it's the only thing that's constant. The name changes, the registration numbers changed, but if you have the hull ID number, that stays constant and you can always tie it to the boat because every now and then we'll run into that with customs, not on a sales side, but more on cruising permits. But
Trey, for background, the difficulty too is that when you know who the customs broker is, you have a higher chance of finding this document. But what we had uncovered with Michelle and shared with our audience a few months back is that original entry summary is not something you can query and find from CBP. You're not going to find it. What
right.
does that mean? It means it's on you to prove that duty is paid on the vessel
Mhm.
when you go to sell it or when you're buying
Sure.
it and there isn't that proof. It's on you to accept the risk or perhaps accept that at some point, maybe you will
Yep.
be required to pay duty again because that is the only way to get this document if it's gone missing
Right.
along the way. That document should follow the foreign boat from their first owner importing it to the US all the way through. And before, I guess it didn't matter because people were thinking, well, it's 1.5%, big whoop. There was limited, I guess, enforcement or scrutiny, and everything's changed.
Right. Well, especially in the industry, I struggle with this. All right. And this is less customs broker, just more normal human being thought. But if if I have a 25-year-old boat and I can maybe pull an abstract of title from the US Coast Guard and see that it's been Coast Guard documented 5 times, you can find bills of sale that were notarized in the US over and over and over. It's no different than me buying a Toyota off of Craigslist as a used car. That's my opinion on that. I do understand though that Coast Guard documentation obviously doesn't prove that imports have been done because we've imported plenty of boats that, like we said, have just showed up here after being in the Caribbean for years and needed to import because they didn't realize they needed to after they'd owned the boat for so many years. But in some of those cases, it's just, I have imported a lot of boats that I'm sure were imported previously, but just couldn't get to closing. I don't necessarily know how much customs really look and go, oh gosh, that's that's a Coast Guard documented boat or U.S. flagged boat. But where's that boat built? It's from 1983. I mean, that part I feel like maybe some of the maritime attorneys and such should really get on, maybe create some consistency there for the industry because not that it doesn't help my business to import boats, but I get that call all the time. We just had one yesterday of someone who bought a boat for his family to cruise around on. It's had 3 Coast Guard. He bought it in Alaska. It's been Coast Guard documented 3 times and only registered 3 times. So it's never been out of the U.S. He was concerned that, with the tariffs as high as they were, is he going to be responsible for having to pay 10 or 11% duty? So it's certainly a concern within the industry for sure.
Yeah, and we speak to it as a risk because it's really
Sure.
a risk only when the vessel has left the country and is
Right.
then come back in. And who knows what day you hit that customs broker, what kind of mood he's going to be in, if he's going to require proof of the customs duty being paid. You may have your US Coast Guard
Right.
documentation right there, but if you don't have proof of that, he could say, well, when was this paid? How do I know? So
Sure.
that's the risk that takes place. And it's also coming to closing.
Yeah.
That is to be proven at that time too when you sell your vessel.
Sure.
And that's what people need to
And more
realize.
common, yeah, definitely, because that comes up at closing all the time. We end up under the pressure of, oh, we need to close in 2 days. I need this import done, and from a broker's thought is, well, you should have done this 2 months ago when you took the listing, make sure all these things were done. You wouldn't be having to push closings or stress out about them. So yeah,
Yeah.
finding out these things ahead of time. They're not the fun part. And I get it too from the broker's standpoint of going, hey, I'd love to list your boat. I need you to pay $40,000 first though, So those are always, it's a challenge.
Yeah, that's a very, very real, and I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to where they're saying, "Well, my boat is US Coast Guard documented. Doesn't that mean that's duty paid?" And we have to go back and explain that a vessel can be US Coast Guard documented and never have entered the US waters, therefore requiring the boat to have US duty paid because that's when it happens. We have to keep putting this into the heads of our listeners, buyers and sellers these days,
Sure.
that that doesn't prove that duty has been paid.
Right. Yeah.
And that's
Absolutely.
when the meaning of that phrase, not for sale to US residents while in US waters, comes in, right?
Right.
This is the
Yeah.
disclaimer that we legally must put on listings that may be in the US temporarily, but are not actually duty paid. And it is against the law for us brokers to go and show this boat to a US resident while it is sitting in US waters. So just warning sign on these listings.
Yeah.
Be very careful. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
let's
Yeah.
talk about currency conversion rules. Why does the exit date from a foreign port matter more than, say, the closing date?
So it's a consistent date. That's why customs really has chosen that. It's very simple to just say this is the date it left the country, and that's the date we're going to use. Because it's easy probably to manipulate your time. Like, oh, well, we'll wait a few days because we're expecting the exchange rate to change, which will maybe I can get a lesser amount of duty that I owe. So that is, at least from what I've read and understood about it for years, is that just they have that one consistent date that you can use, which is date of export. And that's what's written in the regulations, but that is the reasoning why behind it.
Okay,
So,
that makes sense.
yeah, they're not there to be compassionate about your dollars for sure. So,
And so this is, I was going to say, this is the date that matters as the basis for computing the duty, just to go back.
correct.
So this would be, again, a conversion rate that is used by CBP. It's not exactly what is published as, per the market rate. It's a CBP created rate, and it is based upon the date of departure then.
Correct. Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there. I could see
Yeah.
why people call you. It's a lot.
Yeah. We've always had those thoughts of like people call with some really weird questions that have maybe been in the industry for years, at least on the yacht broker side. But I always forget it's like you're on the yacht broker side, not the custom side, and things change constantly. So they constantly are calling and asking for updates on things, which is good to see.
To be frank, we're not going to be the experts. That's where you come in, and that's where our clients can come to
Sure.
people like you to get to the source of the information that they may hear or see. Let's take an example of someone looking to perhaps buy a European boat right now, a boat that's not in the US, and they need
Sure.
to have it imported. Is there anything you can share with us in terms of timeline, and is there any seasonality? Are there any advantages that you can share? Or in the current environment, not that you have a crystal ball, but what are some
Right.
of the predictions you could make around the timeline?
Yeah, so timeline wise, I don't think there's really a seasonal thing. I mean, it's more now the tariff issue. The one thing we do know is right now you have until July 24th when the current tariffs expire. The number is going to be 11.5%. My thought, just from looking into things and all that, is I know the president had advised, I guess, his staff or whoever to start doing investigations under 301, Section 301 tariffs, investigating the countries to see if he can put in tariffs under the 301 section on other countries outside of China that he currently, because those have stuck for him and since 2019 through another presidency and everything. So my guess is after July, that may be what we see, because I don't think the tariffs are just going to disappear, go back to the way they were. I think you're going to still see within days something new pop up, and not knowing what that's going to be. If you're comfortable at 11.5% and can buy a boat and get it here before then, great. If not, it's up in the air, as to what it'll be.
So we need to check back in after July, is what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. I'd say around 22nd and, a couple days before, you'll start hearing rumblings, of what could be next. And usually that ends up being pretty close to what ends up happening. So we'll all be watching and learning at the same time.
So let's talk now about repairs that are done outside of the US and how
Sure.
they become dutiable. So can you give us a scenario of where this catches owners off guard? Do you have an
So,
example of that?
yeah, I mean, the only time I've really had to deal with, 'cause one thing is we're also subject, as at least custom brokers, to having someone declare that to us, because it
Right.
is something you have to declare, which is also the same way that all these, a lot of times you get American flag boats that come in and they're here for years and aren't duty paid because they didn't realize they had to do that.
Right.
And then they also have to disclose it to you. The ones that I have seen are kind of are more when someone buys a boat overseas and then does a lot of repairs to them and really brings that value up. So they may buy a boat for $600,000 and then dump a $500,000 into it. And when they get here, you have $1 million boat. It's not now a five or $600,000 boat that you can import on. So in those scenarios, we have seen that. I've seen that on grand levels of, we bought a boat for 3 million and now it's done $8 million refit in Canada and coming back in, and things like that. So it's
What kind of documentation do they have to give you? I mean, so they come in, they say, "Oh, here's my bill of sale for $600,000." What else are you gonna require of them to prove like, "Okay, we put $500,000 worth of
well, so
extras in?"
yeah, if they admit to, yes, we've done all this work to the boat, then
I was
usually,
going to say, is that really common?
well, that's the thing. So it's we're subject to what people tell us, right, and what the
Right.
information they provide is. But in that case, yeah, you normally need to get receipts from the yard or any of the contractors that did the work on the boats. Whether it's full electronics packages for $150,000 and things like that. So usually it's mostly invoicing from the vendors that did the work, and that's how you can add that value in.
Okay. Yeah, we see this oftentimes where a boat was bought in a US LLC and the boat went straight into charter in the islands.
Right.
Then the boat wants to be sold in US waters. So now the boat is 5 or 6 years old. It's obviously not duty payable at the same price point that they purchased it at 5 years ago. So, where would they go to get a valuation on their vessel? What is the standard for being able to say, okay, we're going to take this valuation and
Right.
duty on?
So kind of the third party, like non-affiliated, so typically a surveyor, the marine surveyors can put a value on it. And it doesn't have to be a full, insurance survey or pre-purchase survey, just a basic condition of the boat. And then they look in the market for, recent sales of competitive vessels and come up with what the estimated market value is. And customs readily accepts that.
Okay. So, a marine surveyor valuation is
Yeah.
enough. A
Yeah.
customs
It's
works
usually
with
the
that.
best. Yeah.
Great.
I actually wanted to ask you a question on that, Trey. You might be aware that there are some changes in the industry platforms, the so-called MLS, and how dealers and brokers report values of boats sold. We have firsthand examples of these all the time. We just settled on a transaction for buyers, so we represented the buying party, and the listing broker simply deleted the listing. I looked to see how it was reported, and it was
Mm.
just gone. So when
Right.
this happens, we're missing critical data points because we're referring probably to older sold dates that are not reflecting current market values. What are your thoughts on that? Are you discussing this with your peers when it comes to people that rely on those market values? That includes custom brokers, surveyors in the industry. When this data goes away, a lot of people will scramble, and they are, I think, already scrambling now. Perhaps they don't
Right.
really quite notice the impact, but it will get worse.
Hmm. So I mean, from what we deal with, it's not something I've really discussed with anyone. I mean, usually it's we'll get a reputable marine surveyor, they'll send us a value, and that's it. So I don't question really where they get their information, but that is interesting though that they're going into what, like, sold boats and those different.
Yeah, so we've shared this information in a prior episode, but the short answer is sources for recent sales is mostly in the back end of the Yacht World database today. The
Hmm,
industry challenger Yachter does not have sold boats data that they report on. They ask the broker to provide it when the boat
right,
closes, but they don't share it with their subscribers, aka the dealers and brokers.
right,
And then people refer to the NADA guide and the Buck guide. I mean, you and I know the kind of yachts we're talking about. You're not going to find valuable data there. They're kind of
right.
looking back as opposed to
Sure.
looking at the present time. And I've been saying this for a while. I'm really concerned with how well we're going to do as an industry to report on actual market valuations. And it impacts a lot of our
Yeah.
industry.
Well, and then
And the
as
fact,
if when a broker's trying to come up with a value, just
there you go.
if they can get a listing to present something. Yeah. I mean, it's very nice to have actual data. That's for sure.
Absolutely. That's the first conversation we have, buyer to sellers, is, if you're looking to sell your boat, what do you think your boat is worth? Let's look at
Right.
what's on the market and what is sold. And same for a buyer. They want to make sure they position their offer very strategically and with
Right.
again, the data backing it up. So
Sure. Well, yeah,
interesting
I
to
mean,
see
if
where this will
you
go.
want to be the fastest boat to sell, you want to know what those sales are and you get the lower value or whatever. You want to value it right to move it for sure. So yeah, that's interesting. There's always something, right?
And when there is no reliable source that can be trusted, or there is only one reliable source and you have
Right.
to pay
Yeah,
to have access to it,
sure.
that's two things that maybe I think we should petition the states, because states, we all have to pay taxes and they know what boats got actually sold for. And that is the truth. And what we should do as a industry is say to the states, can we get sold boats, reliable sold boats data from where taxes are paid?
Right.
That to me would be the perfect place
Sure.
to get true
Absolutely. Yeah.
source
Well,
of
true
data from.
numbers. Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yep.
I don't know. We'll have to talk about this some. I feel like a lot of the times there are areas where some of the sold boat values for registration purposes are not always going to be reliable either. So it's to be
Sure.
taken with a grain of salt. But
Right. Right.
I'm
Right.
afraid we stepped or walked into a can of worm and don't quite know what will come out of it. But we are aware, and we want our audience as well to know it. And I wish the industry had a kind of a better answer for what's to come. And at the moment, we simply do not have it. So we
Sure.
have to rely on the data that we collect as our own sales, and we work with surveyors, of course. And it's going to
Sure.
be much more reliable if it's in our closer circle than it would be through reported sales or
Yeah, I
actually
guess that's
absent
true. You
sales.
have other friends that are trusted yacht brokers that you've worked with, and you can almost create your own databases within trusted people.
But I really hope that the IYBA and Yachter will fix that for us really soon. So more to come. So before we wrap up, I guess the question is for Trey, how would our listeners know what to ask and what to look for if they have to work with a customs broker? They can see that they have this issue they're going to have to tackle. How do you pick a customs broker?
Well, I would say I would certainly find one that does boats primarily. There's probably, I mean, that I can think of 4 or 5 of us customs brokers that do specialize in just boats. Because when I do see entries of brokers that are just brokers, that people, oh, I found a broker in my state and they imported the boat for me. I mean, anyone can get through the process. Although it's gotten a lot harder with the Lacey Act and things like that some may not know they needed. But there are certain things like that all of us do that are in the yachting side of it, like putting whole ID numbers on these imports, because I get a lot of those that I can't do for a customer. For instance, a foreign flag vessel, which we deal a lot with, doing cruising licenses. We do cruising
Right.
permits almost every single day. And
Mhm.
there's a way you can get a cruising license successively. When one expires, the very next day they'll give you a new one if your boat's duty paid. But if I can't tie that duty payment to the actual boat, then customs won't accept it. So we'll present documents to customs, but it will just say, yeah, this is the manufacturer of the boat, but it doesn't have anything that says, yeah, this is the same official number, hull ID, anything that actually ties that piece of paper to that boat. So other than
I
the
see.
manufacturer.
Right.
But it is very specific, the yacht stuff. It definitely is. You don't want to have someone importing seafood, also importing your boat, because you're just two different things.
Very, very true. And how do they specifically contact you, Trey?
They can go through our website, which is howardsreaderinc.com.
We'll make this really easy for Trey. We're actually going to put the link to the marine directory for
Sure.
Howard Reader in the description of this video. We've also listed some other customs brokers. So again, it's up to our listeners to do their due diligence and choose the people they want to hire,
Sure.
whether a customs broker or marine lawyer or a documentation agent. We have lots of resources there.
And I will say, a lot of us do work together. There's certain things that I don't do that I'll call saying, I'll connect them with Michelle, or Michelle will need something that she doesn't want to do anymore. So I'll do it because we still do it. So there's a one thing being in the niche business of customs and yachts is there's not too many of us. And one way or another, if you have a request that I can't do, I know who will do it for you and can do it the best. So
That's great to hear you guys work together.
sure.
Thank you so much, Trey, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on a future episode of Full Displacement. Fair
Awesome.
winds.
Thank you. It was very fun.